I never imagined the person I trusted most would ruin my life. My only son used the paperwork I signed to declare me mentally unfit, and he didn't just take my house. When I woke up in a care facility I didn't recognize, I realized he had erased me from my own life. Hit subscribe if you believe life always finds a way to balance the scales. Because this story proves it. I never thought a simple stroke could change my life forever. One morning, I woke up feeling dizzy, my left hand tingling, and my speech slightly slurred. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself it was just fatigue. I had always been a strong man, independent, and proud of the life I had built for myself. My home, my memories, everything I owned, it was mine, earned by years of hard work and sacrifice. But that morning, everything I had taken for granted began to feel fragile, like a house of cards ready to collapse. My son, my only child, seemed worried, maybe too worried. He rushed in when I called for help, practically bursting through my front door with a sense of urgency that I had never seen from him before. "Dad, you need to be careful," he said, helping me sit down. His voice was calm, reassuring, almost too perfect. He held my hand and told me he wanted to make sure I'd be okay, that I wouldn't be left alone if anything went wrong. And because he was my son, the one person I trusted more than anyone, I believed him. He suggested we go through some paperwork together, something about medical power of attorney, just in case emergencies happened in the future. He explained it carefully, like a teacher walking through a simple lesson. "It's just in case something like today ever happens again, Dad," he said, "so that I can make decisions for you if you can't." I trusted him, naturally. I had taught him right from wrong, guided him through life, and now he was asking me to trust him completely. It felt like a natural step for a father and son. I signed the papers, thinking nothing of it, not realizing that those few signatures would become my chains. For the first few weeks, life felt normal. He checked in more often than usual, which was comforting at first. He cooked meals, reminded me to take my pills, and even took me to my follow-up appointments. I felt grateful. I told myself that perhaps getting older didn't have to be lonely, that maybe having my son close by would bring comfort. But there was a subtle change in him, something I didn't recognize immediately. His reassurances sometimes carried a tinge of impatience, a hint that he was frustrated when I couldn't remember things exactly as he wanted me to. I brushed it off, thinking it was just stress. Then came the little things. Minor disagreements over my medications, questions about my finances, small comments that made me second-guess myself. "Dad, are you sure you remember correctly?" He'd ask, his tone polite but sharp, like a teacher correcting a careless student. I began to feel uneasy, a flicker of doubt gnawing at me. I tried to trust him, tried to tell myself I was imagining things. After all, he was my son. He loved me, didn't he? One afternoon, while sitting in my favorite chair by the window, I realized how dependent I had become on him. Even the small tasks, like paying bills or scheduling appointments, were things he insisted on handling. And though he claimed it was for my safety, I started noticing that I barely had access to my own documents. My checkbook, once neatly organized on the table, was now kept under his control. My mail was often taken care of by him before I even saw it. Something in my gut tightened. The home I had cherished, where I had celebrated birthdays, raised my son, and lived through decades of memories, suddenly felt unfamiliar. One night, as I sat alone after he left, I stared at the signed papers on my kitchen counter. The medical power of attorney, the document I had signed so willingly, now seemed like a trap. A sense of vulnerability I had never experienced before washed over me. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that my independence was slipping away. I had thought I was protecting myself by planning for emergencies, but in doing so, I had handed over the keys to my own life without even noticing. That unease turned into a quiet fear, the kind that creeps into your chest and settles there. I loved my son, yet I began to wonder if love could blind a parent to danger. I tried to shake the thought from my mind, tried to convince myself that I was imagining it, but the feeling persisted. Something in the way he smiled too easily, the way he insisted on controlling every detail, and the subtle way he dismissed my concerns. It all felt wrong. I had no proof, only suspicion, and a growing sense that my life was slowly slipping from my hands while I was still awake to watch it happen. It was a helpless, terrifying feeling, the realization that the person I had trusted most might not have my best interests at heart, and I had unknowingly given him all the power he needed. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I would wake up one day and find that the home, the life, and the dignity I had built would no longer belong to me. Little did I know, that nightmare was about to begin sooner than I ever imagined. At first, the changes were subtle. My son was always around, which I had thought was a blessing, but soon I began to notice a pattern. He insisted on managing every little detail of my life, from which doctor I could see to when I could take my medication. I tried to speak up, to remind him that I was still capable, but he would smile warmly and say, "I just want what's best for you, Dad. You've had a rough time, and I'm only trying to protect you." His words sounded loving, but the way he controlled everything made my stomach twist in knots. Then came the doctor appointments. My son started speaking for me, answering questions that were meant for me, and interrupting when I tried to explain how I felt. He would nod at the doctors knowingly, as if rehearsed, and I began to notice subtle looks between him and the nurses. Looks I didn't understand at first. One day, my physician gently asked if I had experienced any confusion or forgetfulness, and before I could answer, my son chimed in. "He's been very forgetful lately. I worry about his memory." I shook my head, trying to protest, but my voice seemed to disappear beneath his certainty. It wasn't long before my medication started to change. Pills I had taken for years were altered slightly. Doses increased, new medications added without explanation. Every time I questioned it, he would reassure me, saying it was just a precaution, or doctor's orders. I wanted to trust him, and yet, each time I swallowed a pill, a seed of doubt grew inside me. Something felt off, but every time I tried to confront him, he would look at me with those careful, calculating eyes and tell me I was imagining things. The house began to feel like a place I didn't recognize. My own possessions were shifted around. Documents moved, and files that had once been easily accessible now seemed hidden. Bills I had always paid myself were suddenly managed by him, and my account statements were now addressed to him, signed with his authority. I asked him why I no longer had access to my own finances, and he smiled. "Dade, it's for your protection. You're not in the best state to handle everything yourself right now." Protection. That word echoed in my mind, but it started to feel more like a cage. Even friends who had stopped by were subtly discouraged. He would answer the phone for me, saying, "Dade's resting," or "Hey, can't talk right now," and visitors stopped coming. It felt like a quiet isolation was creeping in around me, and I began to realize how much power he had accumulated. It wasn't obvious. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make threats. But every move I made was now filtered through him. The home I had built, the life I had lived, was slowly becoming his domain. One afternoon, I found a small envelope tucked into a drawer, partially hidden beneath a pile of mail. Inside were legal notices, letters about my accounts, and something else that made my heart pound, a notice of a meeting with a lawyer regarding my estate planning. I hadn't signed anything recently, hadn't requested anything, yet there it was. When I confronted him, he simply said, "Oh, that. I was just taking care of some paperwork for your convenience. Don't worry about it." His casual tone made my chest tighten. I could feel the weight of my own life slipping through my fingers, and yet I had no way to stop it. The isolation deepened when he started telling people I wasn't capable of managing my own affairs. Friends and neighbors who once came by to visit began to avoid me, nodding politely when he explained, "Dad's not feeling well. He needs rest." Even my own family members seemed to trust his version of events more than my protests. I tried to speak up, but my voice was drowned out by his calm, persistent insistence that he was only looking out for me. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I realized something terrifying. He had started documenting every detail of my life. Every conversation, every disagreement, every moment of hesitation or forgetfulness was carefully recorded. It was as if he was building a case against me, a case to prove that I was incapable of managing myself. I felt a cold panic rise in me. The very son I had raised, the one I had trusted completely, was quietly constructing the walls of my own imprisonment. I tried to fight back in small ways. I kept notes, jotted down what I remembered from conversations, tried to make sense of the changes he had made to my medications. But every time I tried to assert myself, he would gently correct me, always calm, always kind, always persuasive. I began to feel trapped, as though I were slowly losing my mind. Every day, the fear grew, not just of losing my independence, but of being completely erased from my own life. The turning point came one afternoon, when I overheard a phone call he was making in the kitchen. His voice was quiet, but sharp, and I caught words that made my blood run cold. "Yes, the paperwork is ready. He doesn't suspect anything. Once the declaration is filed, everything will be under my control. The house, the accounts, everything." I couldn't believe it. My own son, planning to take everything from me, while I sat helplessly in my own home. I felt a mix of rage, disbelief, and despair. I wanted to confront him, to scream, to fight back, but I realized he had already anticipated that. From that moment, I understood the danger I was in. My independence, my dignity, my home. It was all under threat, and the person I had trusted the most was the one orchestrating it. The fear I had felt before now became a tangible, suffocating reality. He wasn't just controlling my life, he was preparing to steal it completely. And yet, even in that moment of despair, a spark of determination ignited within me. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted to reclaim what was mine, I would have to be clever, patient, and relentless. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my own son, and I had to start thinking several steps ahead before it was too late. The days that followed were tense, filled with silent observation. I watched his every move, memorized his routines, and paid attention to every little inconsistency. It became a dangerous game of patience, one wrong move, and I could lose everything before I even realized it. And deep down, I knew the day was coming when my nightmare would truly begin, when the full betrayal would be revealed, and I would wake up in a life I no longer recognized. I woke up to fluorescent lights that were too bright and a smell that was unfamiliar, sterile, cold, and unsettling. My head throbbed, and my body ached as though I had been moved while unconscious. The room was strange, small, with bland walls and a single bed that didn't feel like mine. Panic hit me immediately, and I tried to sit up, only to feel a sharp pain in my side. A nurse appeared at the door, smiling politely. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said. "Time for breakfast." I blinked, trying to focus. "Where am I? Why am I here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Your son arranged for you to stay here," she replied calmly. "It's best for your health." My stomach dropped. My son. I tried to recall the past few days, but everything was a blur. The papers, the appointments, the subtle manipulations. They all came rushing back like a nightmare I couldn't wake from, and then the truth struck me like a hammer. He had done it. My own son had declared me mentally unfit, and now I was trapped in a facility I had never agreed to enter. I demanded to speak with someone, anyone, who could explain why I was here. A social worker arrived, polite but firm. "Mr. Carter, your son filed a petition for guardianship. The court has determined that you are unable to manage your own affairs. Everything has been done according to the law." I shook my head in disbelief. "I'm fine. I don't need to be here. This is my home, my life." But my protests were met with gentle nods and rehearsed reassurances. No one seemed to hear me. As the days passed, I tried to understand the extent of what had been taken from me. My house, sold. My bank accounts, frozen. Friends and neighbors, believing I had chosen this care willingly. Every familiar piece of my life had been erased, replaced by rules, schedules, and strangers' authority. I felt as though I were living someone else's life, a version of myself that didn't belong to me anymore. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain. This was my own blood, my own flesh. Who had orchestrated it all? The staff treated me politely, but the facility was designed for compliance, not comfort. I was given meals on a strict schedule, activities that I didn't enjoy, and constant reminders of my supposed limitations. The walls, once filled with the warmth of my memories, now felt like bars in a cage. Every time I tried to call my lawyer or reach out to friends, my son intervened, claiming it was for my own safety. I began to feel the crushing weight of isolation and helplessness, the terrifying reality that my life had been commandeered without my consent. One afternoon, while walking the narrow corridor under supervision, I overheard a conversation between two staff members. They were talking quietly, unaware I was within earshot. "He's very thorough," one said. "Everything's signed and documented. He even has the medical records to back it up." My heart sank. My son had thought of everything, meticulously planning each step to ensure no one would question him. The thought made me sick, but it also sparked a small, defiant anger. I realized that if I didn't find a way to fight back, this nightmare would never end. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, I remembered the small things I had always kept hidden. My journals, my old letters, and recordings I had made over the years. In a flash, I realized that these could be the key to proving my sanity. For months, I had recorded my thoughts, observations, and daily events, mostly to preserve memories, but now they could serve a far more important purpose. My voice, preserved in those recordings, could testify to the man I still was, the life I had lived, and the mind I still possessed. A plan began to form in my mind. I could not allow despair to consume me. I would need patience, strategy, and cunning, the very traits I had relied on throughout my life. I had been betrayed in the most intimate, devastating way possible, but I was not yet defeated. Somewhere beneath the fear and rage, a spark of determination flickered. I would reclaim my life. I would prove that I was still myself, and I would expose the son who had tried to erase me. As the first week in the facility passed, I started observing everything with careful attention. I memorized the routines, the staff shifts, and the visitors who came and went. I knew that one mistake on my son's part, or a lapse in the staff's vigilance, could become my opportunity. I began to take small mental notes, rehearsing the story I would tell when I had a chance. The isolation, the betrayal, the anger, they all fueled a growing resolve. I may have been trapped in a foreign place, but my mind remained mine, and that was something no one could take. The most chilling thought kept echoing in my head. The person I had loved, trusted, and raised to adulthood had stolen everything from me, and he was counting on my helplessness to cement his control. But I refused to let him win. Somewhere, in the midst of this nightmare, I had to find a way to turn the tables. I had to survive, not just to reclaim my possessions, but to reclaim my identity. I quickly realized that fear alone wouldn't save me. Sitting in that sterile room, surrounded by strangers and rules, I knew I had to take action. The first step was observation. I paid close attention to my son's visits, noting every word, every expression, every slight slip. He was confident, almost cocky, as if certain that no one would ever question his authority. But arrogance, I reminded myself, often led to mistakes. I had to wait for the moment when his guard would falter. I began gathering whatever evidence I could, though it wasn't easy. The facility limited my access to phones and emails, claiming it was for my own protection. Yet, I found subtle ways to communicate with the outside world. I wrote notes in my journals, hiding them in places I knew my son would overlook. I memorized conversations, recorded small inconsistencies in his stories, and kept a careful mental log of everything happening around me. Each detail was a piece of a puzzle that, if assembled correctly, could prove my sanity and his deception. It was a dangerous game. I had to appear compliant, docile even, while secretly building a case. Any misstep could alert him or the staff, and I could lose my chance at justice. Still, the anger I felt kept me focused. Every time I thought about the house I had built, the life I had lived, and the trust I had placed in him, I felt a renewed determination. He had underestimated me, and that was my advantage. My son, for all his meticulous planning, began showing signs of impatience. He would sometimes linger longer than necessary during visits, speaking too quickly, offering explanations that contradicted his previous statements. I noticed subtle signs of frustration in his tone when he thought I wasn't listening or when staff interrupted him. Each slip, each micro-expression, became a clue I could later use. I filed them away mentally, waiting for the right moment to strike. I also reached out, discreetly, to people who had known me before this nightmare began. Old friends, neighbors, and even previous colleagues. They remembered me as a capable, sharp man, fully in control of my life. While they couldn't intervene directly yet, their testimonies could serve as crucial witnesses if I had the opportunity to challenge my son legally. The process was slow, but every conversation strengthened my resolve. I realized that isolation could only win if I allowed it. By reaching out quietly, I reclaimed pieces of my independence. Even within the facility, small victories gave me hope. I learned the routines, discovered when the nurses were less attentive, and noted when the staff didn't watch me closely. These small openings allowed me to record conversations, preserve evidence of inconsistencies, and even document the subtle ways my son manipulated those around me. Each day, the plan became clearer in my mind: patience, observation, documentation. With these tools, I could prove what had been done to me. At night, when the corridors were quiet and the facility dimmed, I replayed every encounter in my mind. I imagined confronting him, laying out the evidence, and reclaiming my life. I would prove that I was still myself, that the man who had raised him and built everything from scratch was far from defeated. And I realized something else. The very son who thought he could erase me had given me everything I needed to fight back. His arrogance, his need to control, his overconfidence. They were all weaknesses I could exploit. It wasn't just about recovering my house or my money anymore. It was about reclaiming my identity, proving that blood ties didn't grant someone the right to destroy a life. Each passing day in that sterile, unfamiliar room, I grew stronger mentally, more focused, more determined. I had been betrayed, yes, but betrayal had a way of sharpening the mind and forcing clarity. I would survive this, not merely for myself, but to show that even in the face of the deepest treachery, a man could reclaim what was rightfully his. The day finally came when I saw the opportunity I had been waiting for. My son had grown careless, Confident that his control was unshakable, he made the mistake of leaving documents within reach during a visit and speaking openly to the staff about his plans. I had memorized the schedule, observed every interaction, and recorded every critical detail. Everything I needed to reclaim my life was now within reach. I just had to act. I reached out quietly to my lawyer, using a phone line I had secretly secured. I laid out the evidence, recordings of conversations, documentation of manipulated medications, notes on financial and legal deceptions, and eyewitness statements from friends who could attest to my mental clarity. The lawyer was stunned at the thoroughness and immediacy of the case. We filed motions, presented evidence, and slowly began dismantling the legal walls my son had built around me. Every step forward felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped underwater. When the court date arrived, I faced my son for the first time in weeks. The man I had once loved and raised now looked smaller, nervous, caught off guard by the tide of evidence against him. He tried to argue, tried to claim I was incapable, but the proof was undeniable. My recordings, my documentation, my witnesses, all testified to the life I had always lived and the clear manipulation he had orchestrated. The betrayal was exposed, and the courtroom fell silent at the sheer audacity of his deception. The judgment restored my control over my life. My house, my finances, and my personal autonomy were returned. I felt a strange mix of relief and lingering pain. The wound of betrayal didn't vanish overnight. Trust, once broken, left scars that even the strongest legal victory couldn't erase. But I had survived, and I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine. I had turned the nightmare into a triumph, proving that cunning, patience, and resolve could overcome even the deepest treachery. As I walked back into my home, everything familiar yet tinged with the memory of betrayal, I reflected on the lessons I had learned. The person we trust most can sometimes be the one we should watch most carefully. Family bonds are powerful, but they are not infallible shields against greed or deception. I realized the importance of vigilance, of preserving autonomy even when love asks us to surrender it. I decided to share my story, not for revenge, but as a warning. There are many who, like me, might unknowingly hand over their lives to those they love. And while love and trust are vital, they must be balanced with awareness, documentation, and courage. I survived because I refused to accept helplessness, because I fought in silence, and because I refused to let betrayal define the end of my life. The house felt warm again, the walls echoing memories of a life I had fought to reclaim. I knew the journey had changed me. I was stronger, wiser, and painfully aware of human fragility. My son's betrayal was a wound, but it also became a source of resilience. And as I sat in my favorite chair, looking out at the world I had built and preserved, I realized that even in the darkest betrayal, it was possible to rise, reclaim dignity, and prove that no one, not even blood, could steal the essence of who you are.